So collaboration, again, I said this is our safe place. This is our kumbaya group, right? We're all on the same page. And it's worth just mentioning again that collaboration is really key because we have multiple stakeholders. You've got the learning support teacher and SEAs and classroom teacher administrator working with the parents, and then perhaps outside professionals if there's a BCBA, SLP, OT, et cetera. So, looking at the last bullet point here, collaboration is best achieved in a respectful, trusting, and honest atmosphere, right? Where people come in with humility and really knowing what their roles and responsibilities are so that you can operate within your role and not step on other people's toes. A few recommendations for setting up collaborative meetings. Clear identification of the purpose of the meeting. Have an agenda. I have an aversion to going to meetings that don't provide me with an agenda in advance. I want to know what I'm meeting for and about. That's a reasonable expectation. So having that will help you manage your time. It lets people know why they're here. I've been to meetings where people they didn't give this enough thought. This isn't a major criticism. We invited folks in, we're having a meeting. And it wasn't clear why we're meeting. And the parent thought that we're reviewing the IEP progress. And the teacher thought we were doing something else. But the person who called the meeting had a different agenda. And it was just a bit of a schmozzle. It wasn't the end of the world. Right? But those little things can be avoided by letting everyone know, look, we're meeting for this purpose and for this length of time. Sufficient time for participants to introduce themselves and explain their roles and responsibilities. You've all been at those meetings where you start and you're not sure who everyone is around the table, and then at some point someone says something like, oh, you're the OT, and then there's little introductions, and then it continues on. It's not a great way to run a meeting. Best would be to have everyone go around, introduce themselves, or whoever's facilitating the meeting can introduce everybody and why each of those people are there. Appropriate review of the student's history so everyone's on the same page without necessarily taking the entire meeting to talk about the past and not getting to the agenda item. Use of clear, concise, and jargon-free language that applies for the teachers, for behavior analysts, for SLPs, for everyone involved, keeping in mind that not everyone understands the lingo we're using, parents in particular. If you start talking about, the provincial PLOs for the STOs, or whoa, you just lost me in that acronym. What are you talking about? Right? Spell it out in English. And distribution of meeting minutes and any required follow-up actions so that people know if they have homework after the meeting. For first-time parents, orient them to the process. Share information about what to expect in advance of the meeting. It wouldn't hurt for school staff to have a little brief face-to-face in the hallway or on the phone, just letting them know this is what's going to happen at this meeting so that they can be prepared and comfortable. Especially early on, parents are often quite anxious about what is this IEP meeting going to be, and then they sometimes show up to the cast of thousands. I've been at kindergarten IEP meetings where there's 12 people around the table. I don't know why all 12 of us had to be there. This is a very expensive meeting. And the parent often is intimidated and not sure if they're allowed to speak, or maybe afterwards they feel like they couldn't share things. And so you don't want that to be the outcome at the end of the meeting. Interpreter if needed. We're in Metro Vancouver. I often work with families speaking Farsi or Mandarin, and we can't trust that mom or dad has, I can talk with them. We've got their language skills are far better than my Mandarin skills, for example, but having an interpreter can make all the difference. And then if there is an interpreter, because I go to a number of meetings with interpreters, for everyone to stop talking when the interpretation is taking place and allow that to occur so that nothing's being missed, and then continue on is a very respectful practice. Have adequate time. All of you, we've all been to those meetings where you're halfway through your agenda and then everyone has to rush off, right? So setting time, managing your time appropriately. I work with one school who's made a concerted effort to really improve their IEP process. And one of the things they've done with their administrator support is a minimum of 2 hours for every meeting. And the administrator arranged coverage for everybody. It's a wonderful experience. We never feel rushed. The parents at the end are giving this effusive praise. Like, this is so helpful to me. We got through everything. All of my concerns have been addressed. I get to know the school staff a bit more instead of just rushing through it. That's a luxury. I recognize that not all of you are in settings where you can be given 2-hour meeting blocks. But people are doing it. People are finding ways. So just because there are barriers, don't give up on it. Think about how could we move or approximate towards that. Time is important. The SEA must be present. This is my rule. This is my rule of thumb. I will decline an invitation to an IEP meeting if the SEA is not invited to the IEP meeting. Because my sincere opinion is that the SEA probably knows the kid better than anybody else in the school because they spend the most time with them. They're going to be implementing the strategies, taking the data. To me, it's really disrespectful and a loss of resource not to include the SEA. And I know some places, they just have a policy where they invite these people and the SEAs aren't on that policy list. And actually just bringing it up and adding them to that policy list will change the practice. Other places don't invite SEAs for other reasons that they might justify. But to me, personally, I'm not swayed by the justifications. I think the SEA must be present. I don't know why we're meeting about delivering a service to a student if the primary service delivery person isn't there. Does that make sense? Do all of you have SEAs come to your meetings? Do any of you sometimes not have the SEAs there? It does happen sometimes, right? There are things that come up where maybe the SEA is needed to work with the student and can't be freed up. Reality happens, we get that. But as a general, and this is my soapbox, I'm still up on my soapbox, the SEAs have to come to the meetings, okay? It's respectful. A hard copy for each participant. We need our visual supports. There's nothing like sitting at a meeting for 90 minutes talking about details where I can't see what we're talking about. It's all auditorily delivered. It helps to have, in some cases, you could project it up on a whiteboard. I sometimes, if we're in a room that has a projector, I've always got the IEPs on my computer, I'll just quickly plug it up and everyone can see the visual supports. People like that. In the absence of that, just have them printed out so that everyone can flip the page and follow along, parents in particular. And manage time, adequate coverage of the objectives. I asked that question earlier of these 4 parts of the SEA, what do people focus on? And we talked about the long-term goals and the short-term goals, but often we don't get to the end of those, right? We might have wasted time talking about what are his strengths and weaknesses. That's valuable information, but most of the meeting shouldn't be talking about that because that's stuff we kind of know. We're here to decide on goals, so we need to put our time where it's most useful. Recommendations for parents. Based on practices I've seen from parents that I think are a great idea, and I just want to share them, stealing other people's good ideas. One mom I know, she's notorious. People look forward to her IEP meetings because she walks in with a great big framed picture of Freddie, and she puts it on the table, and then she's got like a spinach bread bowl with dip in the middle, which is really good, and she brings it to every meeting, and each year the students look forward to having Freddie in their class because they get to go to that IEP meeting and get the spinach dip. Right? It just creates a nice positive atmosphere. And she talks about, we're here today to talk about Freddie, and she can point to the picture of her son, and he's there like he's in the meeting. Right? And it keeps us focused on what are we talking about. It's kind of a prompt to avoid territorial battles between professionals, because it's not about you or I or this or that. We're here for Freddie. Right? So I think that's a great strategy. Every now and then I see people do it, and it tends to really go off well. Also for parents, give some thought to what you want your child to achieve this year. Right? When I design an intervention program for a home, I typically follow a comprehensive curriculum. And I certainly have my opinions about what I think are important, but a regular part of that practice is to ask mom and dad, can you please identify 3 to 5 of your priorities, and we'll add those in as priority goals following your lead and your collaboration and involvement in our program, or we'll build those in mutually with the goals that I would identify, right? Making sure that their priorities are reflected in the document. So be prepared to talk about that. Right? And it's usually a very positive addition to the meeting, right? Often at the end of the meeting, mom or dad, anything to add? Parents might be a little bit tentative, and maybe they'll jump and say, when is he going to learn to ride the bus? Like, great, thanks for bringing that up. It's going to become a goal now because you brought it up. Collaboration does occur on a continuum, right? We've got examples of ideal collaboration and then not so much at the other end. Here's some of the failures I've seen. Too little from the school, meaning the school made a collaboration mistake by not collaborating, by meeting behind closed doors, coming up with a document, and then just giving it to the parent to sign with no collaboration, in which case parents often feel completely excluded, as they should. On the flip side of that, I've seen parents do the exact same thing, where a parent might get together with another professional, write their IEP, and then go in and put it on the desk and say, you're going to do that, which is equally disrespectful and equally not collaborative, right? And so I understand that these tend to occur probably in extreme situations where there's other variables, but in both cases, either party could be doing a much better job of collaborating, right? You're much more likely to catch, what's the saying? To catch flies with honey than vinegar. Use your positive reinforcement. Be collaborative, be friendly, develop relationships. You're more likely to move towards positive change that way than by not being collaborative and taking more of a rigid stance. Know the school act. The laws are pretty clear. Neither party can dictate what will be in the IEP. Neither party meaning parent and school. Meaningful consultation is required according to the Huco case. How many of you are familiar with the Huco case? Family in Abbotsford sued the school district there, and the result of the lawsuit was essentially that the school is obligated to provide meaningful consultation with the family and the professionals they might identify. That said, primary responsibility is with the school. According to the School Act, the IEP is technically completely under the authority of the school. Consulting and bringing in the parents, having their professionals like BCBAs or SLPs, et cetera, come in, something that they're obligated to do. But for example, if I give recommendations at an IEP meeting, legally the school has absolutely no obligation to attend to anything I say, to integrate anything I say. And my understanding of the School Act is that actually extends to the parents as well. While they do need to collaborate, the school can write a completely different plan, and which is allowable under the School Act. If anyone knows the School Act legally more in depth than I do and wants to say anything different, please let me know. So consulting professionals like myself, SLPs, are guests and should be clear on which areas they're asked to contribute to. So I go into some schools where they're very clear. Richard, thank you for being here. We just want you to talk about that. Like, okay, then I'm happy to do that if that's what I've been invited here to do. Many other schools, because Applied Behavior Analysis addresses all areas of development, I'm invited to comment on and provide recommendations, suggestions to all areas of the IEP. Part of my academic training is specialty in literacy assessment and intervention. So I'm happy to provide that if I'm invited to. But I'm a guest, and it's important for guests to know their place and to act as guests. And when people don't, that can often result in problems that are going to impede collaboration. In terms of writing practices, local school boards and districts, they determine the format, template, and software to be used. School districts tend to invest lots of money in their particular software package, IEP Central, et cetera, which they use for IEPs. And I've been in circumstances where parents have asked for the IEP to take a slightly different format, and they have to understand that the school, in that case, is obligated to, they have to have on file, in case they're audited, their template. In many cases, if they're open to it, they'll have an addendum or an appendix where they will have the other version of the IEP for reference. But I put that in there just as a matter of policy. The case manager or equivalent, because I know over on the island, Nanaimo Ladysmith School District, tends to be the school counselors, not learning support teachers, who are doing the IEPs. They need to include a number of manageable number of realistic and achievable broad goals or long-term goals, measurable specific short-term objectives, meaningful and doable strategies to achieve those short-term objectives, and then a means to assess and monitor progress for those goals. That comes directly from the Ministry of Education. So these are the questions that came in from the group live and online. How often do kids who have ASD not receive a diagnosis, even when everyone knows that they have autism, but the psychologist has denied the diagnosis? So this is not uncommon. And what we would recommend or suggest that you do is get a second opinion, get a third opinion, but not just from anybody. There are psychologists who have specialization expertise in ASD. Find a psychologist with that type of expertise and keep going. Get a second opinion, get a third opinion. Studies that show brain change, someone was asking for the reference. That's the work around the Early Start Denver model by Geraldine Dawson and Sally Rogers. And I believe that's at the UCLA Davis Clinic in California. So whoever is looking for that reference, there you go. 12-year-old and 10-year-old kids have ASD. Social skills and anxiety are the major problems, challenges. How can ABA help them? Well, two different questions really. For anxiety, the BCBA can work with a mental health team. You should have a mental health team and can apply the strategies in the real world. So I work with some kids who have anxiety, OCD, mental health challenges, and they also have myself as a behavior consultant, and then I might work with the school team or therapists at home, where we take the strategies that they practice perhaps with the psychologist, and we go and we utilize them in the real world, right? We create more learning opportunities, more learn units to use the strategies to address the areas of mental health concern. And then social skills, there are some BCBAs who focus and have specialty on training social skills training. That's not my particular area of expertise, but I've got some colleagues who get really jazzed up about doing behavioral social skills training. So I would look on the RASP and read the profiles or word of mouth and find some of the BCBAs who focus on that. There are evidence-based programs like the PEERS program. There's some behavior analysts who have training in PEERS and are implementing that. So our folks are out there doing these things. How can you use ABA to address written output and a student who doesn't want to write? Well, first of all, if this is being addressed as a problem behavior, then a functional behavior assessment would be warranted to determine the function, probably escape. But I would look in general at SRA, Scientific Research Association, direct instruction resources. McGraw-Hill Canada has a wide variety of these under language and comprehension and literacy, I believe, on their website. So the acronyms you see there are language for learning, language for thinking, graduating to language for writing. There's reasoning and writing, And then I know a number of Catholic schools in elementary are very bullish on a daily language review, which is a daily structured multi-grade basic functional units of language, like punctuation and grammar, those great things that they make very good use of. So there's a lot of resources out there that you could look at depending on the particular need and grade level of your student. The motivation to write, I mean, is a bit of a chicken and egg. If the child is not successful, then no wonder he's not motivated to do it, right? If you can provide more effective instruction, more engaging instruction, then that should help mitigate the motivation, the escape motivation, right? I don't like to do things that are difficult for me. If you make them easier and more successful, I might not resist so much. And additionally, you could add reinforcement strategies, token systems, et cetera, if that was warranted. What's the difference between consequence and reinforcement? Well, a reinforcer is a type of consequence, and tomorrow I'm going to give you a whole university lesson on the types of consequences, so stay tuned for that. Do measurable goals for IEPs always need a % correct? Not necessarily. It depends on what your evaluation criteria is, but we're going to get to that this afternoon. How to get ABA-trained SEAs in the school? Great question. There's a parent asking, how do I get an ABA-trained SEA for my kiddo in school? ACT has some fabulous resources. There's an advocacy webinar that you can access to help train you and empower you to be an effective advocate. And you know, it really varies. There's no easy answer to this. There are some school districts where this is kind of built in. They have a heavy ABA training emphasis and they provide that to their staff. And there are other districts where this doesn't happen at all. You might not be able to find anyone. And there's a lot of exceptions to all the rules. I know some families who have worked collaboratively with union environments, and they agreed to write the job posting in such a way that it could only fit somebody who had ABA and kind of work people in that way. I know some folks who go to private schools because they have a bit more flexibility and influence there and can bring their staff in. So there's a variety of ways to get it done, but it really does vary district by district. There's no easy slam dunk answer there. Why does the government drop the ball providing ABA for under 6 but then not in schools? Why is there all this funding for ABA under 6 but then they don't continue it in schools? Well, I think something to keep in mind is the funding switches from the Ministry of Children and Family Development to the Ministry of Education, and the ministries operate independently in that regard. So the Ministry of Education isn't behind funding autism the way MCFD provides the intervention funding. Also keep in mind the total funding allocated by the government. If you've got kids under 6, they're receiving $22,000 from the Ministry of Children and Family Development. And then when they go to school and they turn 6, people often lament the fact that that is reduced to $6,000. That is too bad. Those kids could use more of that funding. However, the total commitment from the government actually increases because the kids who are over 6 in school, they continue to get the $6,000 from MCFD. They also get $8,000, which is the head count. Every kid in school, the government gives that school $8,000 because that person is there. And then they get $18,200 for their category G designation, which brings it up, if my math is correct, to $32,200. And keeping in mind that the cost, I believe Surrey School District administrators have told me, it costs them about $55,000 a year to employ a full-time SEA, ABA-trained SEA with benefits and all that type of thing. And they're only getting $26,000 from the government. And so the school district actually has to make up the considerable difference. So there are problems to be solved in our funding model. What can an EA do? This is an easy question, not. What can an EA do if a teacher refuses to follow the IEP, saying that she's been teaching for 30 years and nobody's going to tell her how to teach students? I can't just hand you an answer to that one, unfortunately. Wow, that's a difficult one. But again, it really comes back to advocacy, right? The parent advocating with the other people. The teacher, in this case, who appears to be a barrier, is one of multiple people on the child's team, not the only person. So there's some advocacy work to be done there. The tyranny of low expectations. How do we address a culture which is just about keeping students with severe ASD quiet for the day? This was an online question. And it really is a school culture thing. And I think one of the easiest, well, not easiest, but a logical way to change school culture is from the top down. It's one of the reasons I asked at the beginning of the day, are there any administrators here? Because if an administrator comes in with the idea, with a high bar for kids with autism, and they can't just be in the special ed room being kept quiet all day, that will influence things. But not every school has that administrator setting that bar. That's another one that's really impossible to to answer in a way that's going to work for everybody. I worked with one school where the parent coming into grade 8 to 12 high school, was a powerhouse. She came in and she fought for her kid to not be just stuck in the special ed room. She wanted him out and eating in the cafeteria and going to classes with his friends and taking the bus and not just doing daycare field trips with the rest of the kids. And the school regarded her as a problem for them. But she fought this year after year, and she brought about a culture change so that after a few years, it wasn't just her kid who didn't have to stay in special ed all day. All the kids got to leave special ed. And she really brought about this legacy of more inclusion, right? Combating the tyranny of low expectations, that she had goals for her kid and she wanted them met, and it started to influence other people. And she fought this year after year after year. And after he graduated in grade 12, and she was exhausted by the end of high school, that teacher who she'd worked with and helped bring about the change, that teacher left, someone new came in, and right back to where they were. Because I know kids in that school now, and it's right back to where she started her fight in grade 8. So it really is about the people, right? The people make the difference. The people set the culture. So it's great that you're here today because, I'm preaching to the choir here, but we can go out there and spread the word and raise the bar against the tyranny of low expectations. What is a reasonable length of time to observe and take data to establish a baseline data representation of a child's functioning around a specific skill? Highly individualized. It depends on the skill and how concrete you want to be. If you're just sitting in a room and making a guess, throwing a dart at the dartboard in the dark, that's not very good. If you spend any time at all out there checking, that's better than nothing. So do the best job you can with the resources you have available to you. There isn't a specific criteria. If you wanted my scientific answer to that, you need at least 3 observations, because in research, you need 3 data points to make a baseline. But in the real world, you can get away with less than that, right? You don't have to publish your results. They don't have to meet that level of rigor. You just need functional data. So whatever works for you.